came alive from nothing. He became aware from unawareness. He smelled the air of the night and heard the trees whispering on the embankment above him. The breeze that had set the trees whispering came down and felt him over with soft, tender fingers, as if examining him for broken bones or bruises. He sat up and put both his palms down on the ground beside him to help him rise, and stared into the darkness. Memory came slowly, and when it came, it was incomplete and answered nothing. His name was Henderson James, a human being sitting somewhere on a planet called Earth. He was 36, and in his own way, famous and comfortably well off. He lived in an old ancestral home on Summit Avenue, a respectable address, even if it had lost some of its smartness these last 20 years. On the road above the embankment, a car went past, tires whining, and for a moment, its headlights made the treetops glow. Far away, muted by distance, a whistle cried out, and somewhere else a dog was barking with a flat viciousness. His name was Henderson James. If that were true, why was he here, sitting on this embankment, listening to the wind and a wailing whistle and a barking dog? Something had gone wrong, some incident that, if he could only remember it, might answer all his questions. There was a job to do. He sat and stared into the night and found that he was shivering, though the night was not that cold. Beyond the embankment, he heard the sounds of a city late at night, a speeding car, a far-off wind-broken screaming siren. Once a man walked along a street close by, and James sat listening to his footsteps until they faded out of hearing. Something had happened, and there was a job to do, a job strangely interrupted by the incident that left him lying here. He checked himself. Clothing, shorts and shirt, strong shoes, his wristwatch, and the gun in the holster at his side. A gun. The job involved a gun. He had been hunting in the city, hunting something that required a gun, something prowling in the night that must be killed. Then he knew the answer, but even as he knew it, he wondered at the strange, methodical, step-by-step reasoning that had brought him to the memory. First his name, then where he was, then why. A logical way to think, a primer schoolbook way to work it out. I am a man named Henderson James. I live in a house on Summit Avenue. Am I in the house on Summit Avenue? No, I am not in the house on Summit Avenue. I am on an embankment somewhere. Why am I on the embankment? But it wasn't the way a man thought, not a normal way. Man thought in shortcuts, cutting across the block, not going all the way around. It was a frightening thing, this clear around the block thinking. It made no more sense than finding himself here with no memory of arriving. He rose to his feet and ran his hands up and down his body. His clothes were neat, not rumpled. He hadn't been beaten or thrown from a car. There were no sore places on his body, and his face was unbloody and whole, and he felt all right. He hooked his fingers in the holster belt and shucked it up tight on his hips and pulled out the gun, checking it with expert, familiar fingers. The gun was ready. He walked up the embankment, reached the road, and crossed it with a swinging stride toward the sidewalk, fronting a row of new bungalows. He heard a car coming and stepped off the sidewalk to crouch in a clump of evergreens, the move instinctive, and he felt just a little foolish for it. Car went past, and no one saw him. They would not, he realized, have noticed him even out on the sidewalk. He was unsure of himself. That must be the reason for his fear. A blank spot in his life had undermined the sure foundation of his own existence. It had turned him momentarily into a furtive animal that darted and hid at the approach of his fellow men, and something that made him think clear around the block. He remained crouching, watching the street and sidewalk, conscious of the white-painted ghostly bungalows squatting back in their landscaped lots. A word came into his mind. Puudly. An odd word, unearthly, yet it held terror. The puudly had escaped, and that was why he was hiding here on a sleeping citizen's lawn, gun in hand, ready to match wits against the most hate-filled thing in the galaxy. The puudly was dangerous, not a thing to harbor. There was good reason for the law against it, reason no one would ever think to question. And now the puudly was loose, somewhere in the city. James grew cold at the thought, his mind forming images of what might come to pass if he failed to hunt the alien beast down. Beast was not quite the word. The puudly was more than a beast. He had not learned all there was to learn, but he had learned enough to frighten him. He had learned how shallow human hate was against the depth of the puudly's, not blind hate, but a rational calculating hate aimed at everything that was not a puudly. A clever, deadly killing machine, its cunning directed against every living thing that was not itself. The beast operated on one law only. That safety lay in the death of every other living being. No other reason was needed for its killing. The fact that anything else lived and moved, posing even the remotest threat, was reason enough in itself. It was psychotic, some murderous instinct buried deep in the creature's racial memory. But no more psychotic, perhaps, than many human instincts. The puudly had been a unique opportunity for a study in alien behavior. Refused a permit, one sometimes did a foolish thing as James had. And foolish acts backfire, as this one did. James put a hand down and patted the gun at his side, as if the gesture might lend him some assurance he was equal to the task. There was no question in his mind as to the thing that must be done. He must find the puudly and kill it before the break of dawn. Anything less than success would be abject and horrifying failure. For the puudly would bud. Dozens of baby puudlys loosed upon the earth within hours, each one striking out on its own almost at once. To find one puudly lost in a sleeping city seemed bad enough. To track down some dozens would be impossible. So it was tonight or never. Tonight, the beast would want only to rest in quiet and bring other puudlys into being, undisturbed. It was clever. It would have known exactly where it was going before it even escaped. No time wasted seeking or doubling back. Already it was there. Already the buds would be rising on its body, bursting forth and growing. There was one place, and one place only, in the entire city where an alien beast would be safe from prying eyes. A man could figure that out, and so could a puudly. Would the puudly underestimate a man? Or, knowing that he would know it too, would it choose to hide somewhere else? James rose from the evergreens and went down the sidewalk. The street marker at the corner told him where he was, closer to his destination than he had hoped. The zoo was quiet for a while, and then something sent up a howl that raised James' hackles and made his blood stop in his veins. James, having scaled the fence, stood tensely at its foot, trying to identify the howling animal. He was unable to place it. A person simply couldn't keep track of all the zoo's occupants. New ones, strange, unheard of creatures from the distant stars, coming in all the time. Straight ahead lay the unoccupied moat cage that, until a day or two before, had held an unbelievable monstrosity from the jungles of an Arctian world. James grimaced in the dark, remembering the thing. They had finally had to kill it. And now the puudly was there. Well, maybe not there, but the one place in the entire city where it might be seen and arouse no comment. One animal more would go unnoticed, unless some zoo attendant thought to check the records. There, the puudly would be undisturbed. Could quietly go about the business of butting out more puudlies. Unbothered in this place set aside for strangers brought to Earth, to be stared at by that ferocious race, the humans. James stood quietly beside the fence. Henderson James, 36, unmarried, alien psychologist, an official of this zoo daughter, and an offender against the law for having secured and harbored an alien being barred from Earth. Why, he asked himself, did he catalog himself this way? It was instinctive to know oneself. There was no sense in outlining it. It had been foolish to go ahead with this puudly business. If the old renegade spaceman had not come to him over a bottle of delicious Lupin wine, offering to deliver one live puudly, it never would have happened. James was sure he never would have thought of it himself. But the old captain was a man he knew and admired, one who would do what you paid him for and keep his lip buttoned. James had wanted a puudly, a most engaging beast whose tricks might open new chapters in the study of alien minds. But it had been a terrifying thing to do, and now that the beast was loose, the terror was compounded. It was not beyond speculation that the descendants of this one brood might wipe out the population of the Earth, or make it untenable for its rightful dwellers. A place like the Earth, teeming with millions, would be a field day for the fangs of the puudlies and the minds that drove them. They would kill for survival, like a cornered rat. Except they would be cornered nowhere but in the insecurity of their own minds. If the posses scoured the Earth, they would be found in all directions, shrewd enough to scatter, knowing the ways of guns and traps and poisons. Each of them would accelerate their budding to replace, with a dozen or 100, the ones that might be killed. James moved quietly to the edge of the moat and let himself down into the mud that covered its bottom, never properly cleaned since the last killing. Slowly he waded out into the mud, feeling his way, his feet making sucking noises until he reached the rocky incline leading up to the island cage. He stood for a moment, hands on the great wet boulders, listening, trying to hold his breath so it would not interfere with hearing. The howling thing had quieted, and the night seemed deathly quiet. Then he heard the small insect noises running through the grass and bushes. The whisper of leaves across the moat, and the far-off sound that was the hoarse breathing of a sleeping city. Now, for the first time, he felt fear, in the silence that was not silence, in the mud beneath his feet, in the boulders rising from the moat. The puudly was dangerous not only because it was strong and quick, but because it was intelligent. It reasoned, planned, schemed. It could talk, not as a human talks, but better, luring victims with the thoughts it put into their minds. It held them entranced with dreams and illusion until it slit their throats. It could purr a man to sleep, lull him to suicidal inaction. It could drive a man crazy with one flicking thought, an alien perception so foul the mind recoiled and stayed coiled tight, like an overwound watch that will not run. It should have budded long ago, but had fought it off, planning its fight to stay on Earth, which meant its conquest of Earth. It had planned well against this very moment, and would feel or show no mercy to anyone who interfered. His hand went down and touched the gun, his jaw tightening, a new lightness and hardness rising in him that hadn't been there before. He pulled himself up the boulder face, breathing shallowly, quickly and surely, and without noise, needing to reach the top before the puudly knew he was there. The puudly would be relaxed, engrossed in the budding forth of a family that would one day wage a grim crusade to make an alien planet safe for puudlys alone. That is, if the puudly were here at all. James was only a human, trying to think like a puudly, with no way of knowing if he'd succeeded. He could only hope his reasoning was vicious and crafty enough. His clawing hand found grass and earth, and he sank his fingers deep into the soil, hauling himself up the last feet of rock above the pit. He lay flat on the sloping ground, listening, tensed for any danger, studying the ground foot by foot. Distant street lamps threw back the blackness that had engulfed him climbing from the moat, but pockets of shadow still had to be studied closely. Inch by inch he squirmed along, making sure of the terrain before he moved a muscle, watching for the faintest hint of motion. Alert for any hump or irregularity that was not rock or bush or grass. Minutes magnified into hours, his eyes aching with staring, the lightness in him draining away, leaving only a hardness tense as a drawn bowstring. A sense of failure crept into his mind, not just for the world, but for the dignity and pride that was Henderson James. If the puudly were not here, he would have to notify the authorities, plead with newspapers and radio to warn the citizenry. Reveal himself as a man who, through pride and self-conceit, had exposed the people of Earth to this threat. They would not believe him, would laugh at him until the laughter died in their torn throats, choked off with their blood. He sweated, thinking of it, thinking of the price this city, and the world, would pay before it learned the truth. There was a whisper of sound, a movement of black against deeper black. The puudly rose in front of him, not more than 6 feet away from its bed beside a bush. He jerked the pistol up, finger tightening on the trigger. "Don't. I'll go along with you." His fingers strained with careful slowness and the gun leaped in his hand. Even as it fired, he felt the whiplash of terror slash at his brain. Too late. You should have tried that first. You wasted precious seconds. You would have got me if you had done it first. It had been easy, much easier than he had thought. The puudly was dying, and the Earth's millions were safe. Best of all, Henderson James was safe. Safe from indignity. Safe from being stripped naked of the little defenses he had built through the years. He felt relief flood over him, leaving him pulseless and breathless and feeling clean, but weak. You fool. You fool, you half-thing, you duplicate. It died then, and he felt it die. Felt the life go out of it and leave it empty. He rose softly to his feet, stunned, thinking it was only from having touched hands with death. The puudly had tried to fool him, to throw him off balance for the second it needed to hurl its mind-blasting thought. If he had hesitated, if his finger had slackened for even a moment, it would have been too late. The puudly had known he'd come to the zoo, and had held him in such contempt it never even tried to stalk or watch for him. It had simply waited until he was almost on top of it before it moved. And that was queer. The puudly must have maintained a casual contact with his mind every second since it escaped. He hadn't known that until this very moment, though knowing it now, it seemed as if he'd always known it. What is the matter with me? There's something wrong with me. I should have known I could not surprise the puudly, and yet I didn't. I must have surprised it, or it would have finished me off quite leisurely, any moment after I climbed from the moat. "You fool," the puudly had said. "You fool, you half thing, you duplicate. You duplicate." He felt the hard, unquestioned identity of himself, as Henderson James drain out of him, as if someone had cut the puppet's string, and he, the puppet, had slumped upon the stage. So that was why he had been able to surprise the puudly. There were two Henderson Jameses. The puudly had been in contact with the original and had known every move he made, that James was safe. It had not known of the second Henderson James, the one that had stalked it through the night. Henderson James, duplicate. Henderson James, temporary. Henderson James here tonight, gone tomorrow. For they would not let him live. Duplicates were made only for special, temporary reasons, and once their purpose was served, they were done away with. Done away with, gotten out of the way, swept out of sight and mind, killed as unconcernedly as one chops off a chicken's head. He walked forward and dropped to one knee beside the puudly, running his hand over its body in the darkness. Lumps stood out all over it, the swelling buds that would never break to spew forth a brood of puudly pups. He rose to his feet. The job was done. The puudly had been killed before it could give birth to a horde of horrors. The job was done, and he could go home. Home? That was the thing planted in his mind, to walk back deliberately, unsuspectingly, to the house where his executioners would wait. The job was done, and his usefulness was over. He was no longer wanted, an embarrassment, superfluous. Now wait a minute. You may not be a duplicate. You do not feel like one. That was true. He felt like Henderson James. He was Henderson James, who had illegally brought a puudly to Earth to study its alien mentality. He had been a fool to do it, yet at the time it had seemed important to understand the deadly alien mentality. I am human. But even so, the fact meant nothing. A duplicate would be exactly as human as the original, differing in not a single basic factor. But in certain other things, no matter how full-limbed he sprang from his creation, he still would be a new man. He would have the capacity for knowledge and thought, and in a little time would have and know and be all the things his original was. It would take time to fully coordinate all the knowledge in his mind. At first he'd grope and search until he found the things he must know. Until he became acquainted with himself, he could not reach exactly and unerringly for the thing he wished. That had been exactly what he'd done, groped and searched, compelled to think, at first, in simple basic truths and facts. I am a man. I am on a planet called Earth. I am Henderson James. I live on Summit Avenue. There is a job to do. It had been quite a while, he remembered now, before he'd been able to dig out of his mind the nature of the job. There is a puudly to hunt down and destroy. He could not yet find, in the still veiled recesses of his mind, the valid reasons why a man should run so grave a risk. If he were the original, he would know those reasons now, as part of himself, without searching for them. The puudly had known, beyond any chance of error, that there were two Henderson Jameses. A mentality far less astute would have figured it out. If the puudly had not talked, I never would have known. I would even now be walking to the house on Summit Avenue. He stood lonely and naked of soul in the wind that swept across the moated island. There was a sour bitterness in his mouth. I'm sorry now I did it. If I had known, I never would have killed you. Stiffly erect, he moved away. He stopped at the street corner, keeping well in the shadow. Halfway down the block, on the other side, was the house. A light burned in one of the rooms upstairs, and another on the post beside the gate, lighting the walk up to the door. Just as if, he told himself, the house were waiting for the master to come home. An old lady of a house, hands folded in its lap, rocking very gently in a squeaky chair, and with a gun beneath the folded shawl. His lip lifted in half a snarl as he stood there, looking at the house. What did they take me for? Putting out a trap in plain sight and one that's not even baited. Then he remembered. They would not know that he knew he was a duplicate. They would think he believed he was Henderson James, the one and only, and would expect him to come walking home quite naturally. So far as they would know, there would be no possibility of his finding out the truth. And now that he had, now that he was here, across the street from the waiting house, he had been brought into being to do a job that his original had not dared or wanted to do. He had carried out a killing his original didn't want to dirty his hands with or risk his own neck doing. Or was it instead the necessity of two men working the job? The original as a focus for the puudly's watchful mind, while the other crept up to kill it. No matter what, he had been created at a good stiff price from the pattern of the man that was Henderson James. The wizardry of man's knowledge, the magic of machines, a deep understanding of life itself, had made a second Henderson James. It was legal under certain circumstances, but a duplicate was never allowed to continue living once its purpose was served. Usually the duplicate was not meant to know. No suspicion, no foreknowledge of the doom invariably ordered for him. The duplicate knitted his brow, trying to puzzle it out. There was a strange set of ethics here. He was alive, and he wanted to stay alive. Life, once tasted, was too sweet to go back to the nothingness he had come from. Now that he had known life, might he not hope for a life after death, the same as any other human being? Might he, too, have the same right to grasp at the shadowy promises held out by religion and by faith? He tried to marshal what he knew of those promises, but his knowledge was elusive. A little later, he would remember more. When the neural bookkeeper in his mind coordinated the knowledge inherited from the pattern, he would know. He felt a trace of anger at the unfairness of learning how wonderful life was, only to have it snatched away. It was a cruelty beyond mere human cruelty, a machine society that measured existence only in mechanical physical worth. It discarded, with a ruthless hand, whatever part of that society had no specific purpose left. The cruelty was in ever giving life, not in taking it away. His original, of course, was the one to blame, the one who had obtained the puudly and let it escape. It was his fumbling and his inability to fix his own error that had created the necessity of fashioning a duplicate. And yet, could he blame him? Perhaps rather he owed him gratitude for a few hours of life, for the privilege of knowing what life was like. That light in the upstairs room was in the study off the master bedroom. Up there, Henderson James, original, was waiting for the word. It was an easy thing to sit and wait for the word that was sure to come, easy to sentence to death a man one had never seen. even if that man be the walking image of oneself. It would be a harder decision to kill him if you stood face to face, closer than a brother, flesh of your flesh, blood of your blood. There would be a practical advantage too, working with a man who thought as you did, almost as if there were two of you. A thing like that could be arranged. Plastic surgery and a price for secrecy could make the duplicate into an unrecognizable other person. A little red tape, some finagling. But it could be done. It was a proposition he hoped would interest Henderson James, original. The room with the light could be reached with luck, with strength and agility. The chimney's rough brick face ran up the wall. A man could climb its rough brick face, could reach out and swing himself through the open window into the lighted room. Once face to face, it would be less of a gamble. The duplicate no longer an impersonal factor, but a man close to his original. There would be watchers, but they'd be watching the front door. If he were quiet on the chimney, he'd be in the room before anyone noticed. He drew back deeper in the shadows and considered face his original and strike a compromise, or simply light out and run. Both ways were a gamble. One quick succeeding or failing within the hour, the other dragging on for months, never knowing if he was safe. Something nagged at him, a persistent little fact that skittered through his brain and eluded him. His mind shrugged it off. The quick way or the long way? He stood thinking for a moment, then moved swiftly down the street, seeking a place to cross in shadow. He had chosen the short way. The room was empty. He stood beside the window quietly, only his eyes moving, searching every corner, checking a situation that couldn't seem quite true. Then he strode swiftly to the bedroom door and swung it open. His finger found the switch and the lights went on. The bedroom was empty, and so was the bath. He went back into the study. He stood with his back against the wall, facing the hallway door, his eyes going over the room, orienting himself. Feeling himself flow into the shape and form of it, feeling familiarity creep in upon him and enfold him in belonging. Here were the books, the fireplace with its mantel loaded with souvenirs, the easy chairs, the liquor cabinet. All were a part of him, a background as much a part of Henderson James as his body and his inner thoughts. This, he thought, is what I would have missed. The experience I never would have had if the puudly had not taunted me. I would have died an empty and unrelated body that had no actual place in the universe. The phone purred at him and he stood there startled, as if an intruder had pushed its way into the room. The phone rang again and he went across the room and picked it up. James speaking. "That you, Mr. James?" The voice was that of Anderson, the gardener. "Why, yes. Who did you think it was?" "We got a fellow here who says he's you." Henderson James, duplicate, stiffened with fright, his hand grasping the phone so hard he wondered why it didn't pulverize beneath his fingers. "He's dressed like you, and I knew you went out. Talked to you, remember? Told you that you shouldn't. Not with us waiting for that thing." Yes, certainly I remember talking with you. "But sir, how did you get back?" "I came in the back way. Now what's holding you back?" "He's dressed like you." "Naturally. Of course he would be, Anderson." And that, to be sure, didn't quite follow. But Anderson wasn't too bright to start with. and now he was somewhat upset. You remember that we talked about it. I guess I was excited and forgot. You told me to call you, to make sure you were in your study though. That's right, isn't it, sir? You've called me, and I am here. Then the other one out here is him? Of course. Who else could it be? He put the phone back into the cradle and stood waiting. It came a moment after, the dull, throaty cough of a gun. He walked to a chair and sank into it, spent with the knowledge of how events had been ordered, that now, finally, he was safe. Soon he would have to change into other clothes, hide the gun and the clothes he was wearing, so as to arouse no suspicion. He felt his nerves quieting and allowed himself to glance about the room, the soft, earned comfort of a man solidly established in the world. He smiled softly. It will be nice. It had been easy. Now that it was over, it seemed ridiculously easy, because he had never seen the man who walked up to the door. It was easy to kill a man you have never seen. With each passing hour, he would slip deeper into the personality that was his by right of heritage. There would be no one to question, after a time not even himself, that he was Henderson James. The phone rang again and he got up to answer it. This is Alan, over at the duplication lab. We've been waiting for a report from you. Well, I just called to tell you not to worry. It slipped my mind before. I see, said James, though he didn't. We did this one a little differently. An experiment we thought we'd try out. Slow poison in his bloodstream. Just another precaution. Probably not necessary, but we like to be positive. In case he fails to show up, you needn't worry any. I am sure he will show up. 24 hours. Like a time bomb. No antidote for it, even if he found out somehow. It was good of you to let me know. Glad to. Good night, Mr. James.